the Deep Dive podcast with Emily and Giuseppe. Imagine being trapped in a metal tube, 75 meters underwater.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, the lights are completely out. All around you, ruptured pipes are hissing in the pitch dark, the icy water is rising rapidly, and your 52 crewmates are slowly suffocating.
That is just terrifying.
It really is. There's no rescue team mobilizing. You're 19 years old, and you are sitting on the seabed of the English Channel.
And this actually happened.
Exactly. This terrifying high-stakes scenario was the reality for Walter Schmietenknop on June 18, 1944. Welcome to today's Deep Dive. We are so glad you're joining us because today we're exploring a remarkable first-hand account of survival and morality during the Second World War.
Right, and the sources guiding our discussion today include excerpts from Walter's personal memoir, Saved by Walter Schmietenknop, alongside the naval historical records that detailed the specs and the ultimate destruction of his submarine, the U-767.
But we should establish right away that this isn't, merely a tactical military overview.
No, not at all. It is a really intimate look at a young man drafted into a regime he fundamentally opposed. It's about his highly improbable escape from the crushed depth of the ocean and the complex humanity he fought to maintain as a prisoner of war in the American South.
To understand how Walter navigated those extremes, we really have to look at his foundation. He grew up in the German village of Kleefeld, and his family was engaged in this quiet but incredibly dangerous defiance against the state.
Yeah, his father, Fritz, was a very devout man. When the local authorities and neighborhood sympathizers pressured him to send his children to the Hitler Youth,
The young folk.
exactly, the Young Volk, on Sunday mornings, Fritz just flat out refused. He insisted his children would attend church and Sunday school instead.
And he even took it a step further, hosting a Sunday school in his own home in the afternoons.
I mean, think about the psychological weight of that decision. In the 1930s, the state demanded absolute ideological conformity. Refusing to participate wasn't just frowned upon.
Right, it marked you as a dissident.
Exactly. And the pressure wasn't just coming from faceless government officials either. It was local. It was neighbors reporting on neighbors. Because of these complaints, Fritz actually lost his government job maintaining the local roads.
He was effectively blacklisted from employment simply for prioritizing his faith over state indoctrination.
And he only avoided a much worse fate, like being sent to a concentration camp because of an unseen protector.
Right, his cousin.
Yeah, his cousin Fritz Bright happened to be a local judge. Bright wasn't a particularly religious man himself, but he recognized the creeping totalitarianism of the regime. Whenever the official complaints about Walter's father landed on his desk, the judge quietly tore them up.
Wow.
That hidden intervention is the only thing that kept the family intact.
That environment of moral resistance clearly deeply influenced Walter. There's a haunting moment from his childhood in 1938, right in the immediate aftermath of Kristallnacht.
Oh, that story is chilling.
It really is. Walter came home to find his father and grandfather analyzing the news of the orchestrated violence. His father was worried about eventual retribution for what the state was doing. The grandfather pointed to the swastika printed in the corner of the newspaper and delivered a chilling prophecy.
He said, within 10 years, these hooks on the swastika will hack our Germany to pieces.
Yeah. He operated under the firm belief that no military might could save the nation from the ultimate judgment it was bringing upon itself.
With that worldview ingrained in him, Walter came of age. And by 1942, the draft was unavoidable.
Right. And knowing the horrors of the Eastern Front and specifically wanting to avoid being assigned to horse-drawn artillery in the freezing mud of Russia, Walter actually volunteered for the Navy.
He ended up assigned as a machinist on the U-767.
Which was a Type 7C submarine.
Right. And anyone familiar with the Battle of the Atlantic knows the Type 7C was the workhorse of the German fleet. But the reality of living inside one was just grim.
Grim is putting it mildly.
Seriously. You had a 53-man crew crammed into a space packed with 14 torpedoes. There weren't even enough bunks, so the crew slept in shifts, hot bunking.
Space was at such a premium that their rations, literally hams and sausages, were hung from the overhead pipes, swaying right next to critical pressure valves and dials.
On top of the claustrophobia, the U-767 was fitted with a relatively new piece of technology called a snorkel.
Right, because by 1944, Allied radar was incredibly sophisticated, making it suicide for submarines to surface and run their diesel engines to recharge their batteries.
The snorkel was this massive retractable pipe with a floating cap that allowed the sub to pull in air from the surface while remaining submerged at periscope depth.
But the mechanical reality of that snorkel introduced a terrifying new danger.
Yeah, the sub's massive 2,000 horsepower diesel engines required enormous amounts of oxygen. If the ocean was rough and a wave washed over the snorkel, the cap would snap shut to prevent water from flooding the engines.
But the engines wouldn't shut down instantly.
No, they wouldn't. For a few agonizing seconds, those engines would continue trying to pull air, and they would draw it directly from the sealed interior of the submarine.
The crew experienced this as a violent, instantaneous vacuum. Their ears would pop with excruciating pain, and the sudden drop in internal pressure made it physically impossible to open any of the internal bulkhead doors until the pressure was equalized again.
It was a suffocating, disorienting malfunction that constantly tested the nerves of machinists.
And their nerves were already pretty shattered during their training runs in the Baltic Sea, long before they saw actual combat.
Right, they suffered a catastrophic mechanical failure due to human error. A particularly arrogant training cadet was operating the hydroplanes.
Those are the exterior fins that control the pitch and dive angle, right?
Exactly. He pushed the controls far beyond the safe parameters.
The result was an immediate vertical plunge. Walter recalled standing on the circular frame of a watertight hatch, looking straight down the entire length of the submarine as if he were staring down an elevator shaft.
Heavy equipment, including a spare engine cylinder, ripped loose from its mounts and plummeted down the corridor, smashing into the ladders.
The shipbuilders had rated the pressure hull for a maximum safe depth of roughly 200 meters. The U-767 blew past that in seconds, hitting 260 meters.
At that depth, the ocean is exerting hundreds of pounds of pressure per square inch on the steel. Walter described the terrifying sound of the circular steel ribs of the hull popping and groaning under the weight.
The pressure actually compressed the hull so much that the massive drive shafts connecting the engines to the propellers were forced out of alignment, throwing off showers of sparks as they ground against their bearings.
They only survived by throwing the electric motors into full reverse and frantically blowing high-pressure air into the ballast tanks to arrest the dive.
They managed to level off and limp back to the surface. But that incident perfectly illustrates the razor-thin margins of survival they were operating under.
Those margins vanished entirely on their first combat patrol. Initially, they found success. On June 15, 1944, they utilized new acoustic homing torpedoes to sink the British frigate HMS Morne.
But 3 days later, their luck ran out in the English Channel.
On June 18th, the U-767 surfaced to periscope depth and walked right into a coordinated ambush by 3 British destroyers.
The Fame, the Inconstant, and the Havelock.
Right. Before they could take evasive action, a depth charge detonated directly above them.
And a depth charge doesn't even need to strike a submarine directly to destroy it. The concussive shock wave traveling through the dense water simply crushes the hull.
The blast blew the exterior deck plates completely off the U-767. Inside, the trauma was absolute. A heavy generator was ripped from its mounts, crashing onto the electric motor and sparking a severe electrical fire.
The submarine violently rolls onto its side, loses all buoyancy, and plummets 75 meters to the bottom.
Automatic safety doors slam shut. Walter and 17 others are trapped in the stern compartment.
They use the speaking tube to contact command. Dead silence. Hammer Morse code on the steel bulkhead. Nothing.
The rest of the 53-man crew is likely dead.
18 men, sealed in a damaged steel tube 75 meters down in pitch dark, listening to freezing water slowly rising.
The situation is beyond apocalyptic, yet human behavior here is profound.
No panicked stampede, no screaming, except for one sergeant who had mocked religion all patrol, now weeping.
The rest are incredibly calm. They gather in the dark and softly sing the German national anthem.
2 of the strongest men wade to the stern torpedo loading hatch, the only way out.
The locking wheel turns, but the heavy metal hatch refuses to open a single inch.
Brutal physics of deep water. The external pressure is over 100 pounds per square inch.
Like a stack of elephants standing on a manhole cover. Human muscles can't push that.
The only way it opens is if internal air pressure equals external water pressure.
Meaning the freezing water has to keep pouring in, compressing the breathable air into a smaller space until it pushes back with the same force.
But waiting means sitting in the dark, watching the water rise, exhausting limited oxygen.
A mathematical certainty of suffocation. Walter listens as his 17 comrades succumb to lack of oxygen and toxic fumes.
Speak their final words, lose consciousness, slip beneath the rising water.
Walter only survives because of physics and a sliver of luck. The boat settled at a steep angle.
He is sitting on machinery at the absolute highest point, the last man with his head above water.
Breathing from a personal emergency oxygen apparatus.
Finally, he hears a distinct gurgling sound. Feels water seeping through the edges of the hatch.
Internal air is compressed enough. The two men who tried the hatch are dead in the water below.
Running on adrenaline, Walter grabs his breathing gear, pulls himself up, and pushes. The hatch swings open.
He squeezes through the narrow tube, gets stuck, severely tearing the ligaments in both hands.
Adrenaline masks the pain. He pops out into the crushing, freezing darkness of the channel.
And experiences a profound near-death experience. Feels as though he actively lived his entire life again. Every conversation, every face.
He looks up and sees a tiny, faint gray spot of light 75 meters above.
Fixes his eyes on it, knows it means life.
His emergency oxygen runs out almost immediately. Hands are shredded, can't inflate his life jacket, has to free swim.
Training kicks in. If you hold your breath ascending from that depth, compressed air in your lungs rapidly expands.
Lungs will literally rupture.
He forces himself to exhale as he swims upward, fighting every survival instinct.
Expecting his chest to tear apart, breaks the surface, gasping for air. His lungs are intact.
Bobbing in freezing swells, expecting to die of hypothermia, here's massive propellers.
A gray warship bearing down on him. Panics. Thinks it will chop him in its screws.
Engines cut out. A bearded sailor lowers a rope ladder, hauls him up. Walter blacks out.
And the ultimate irony of war. When he regains consciousness, the ship is the HMS Fame.
The exact same British destroyer that dropped the depth charges that sank his submarine.
Which initiates an entirely new phase of his life. He transitions instantly from a combatant to a prisoner of war, and the intelligence-gathering process he faces immediately highlights the differing geopolitical approaches of the Allies.
The contrast is pretty stark. He's initially handed over to an American interrogator whose strategy is pure intimidation.
The interrogator screams at him, insults him, and uses the ultimate threat.
Deportation to the Soviet Union.
Right. They threaten to send him to the freezing, lethal gulags of Murmansk if he refuses to divulge his submarine's designation, even hanging a sign reading Murmansk around his neck.
Walter refuses to break. He's then transferred to British Naval Intelligence, where the approach is entirely psychological. They offer him a cigarette, sit him down in a comfortable setting, and calmly inform him that they don't actually need him to tell them his submarine's number.
Because they already possessed it. When Walter was pulled from the channel, he had a sodden, ruined engine room report stuffed in his pocket.
The British forensics team had meticulously dried the paper, unfolded it, and read the heading printed cleanly in the top. U-767. The interrogation was merely a formality. They had already won the intelligence game.
With his identity confirmed, Walter is placed on a troop ship and transported across the Atlantic to a sprawling POW camp in Georgia. He's put to work in the fields, harvesting peanuts and corn in the oppressive, sweltering humidity of the deep American South.
This environment serves as the backdrop for one of the most fascinating moral intersections in the historical record. Walter, a uniformed soldier of the Third Reich, a state apparatus entirely engineered around racial supremacy and ethnic hierarchy, is suddenly thrust into the Jim Crow South.
And his reaction to the systemic racial violence he witnesses between the white American farm owners and the black laborers is one of utter revulsion.
Exactly.
But let me play devil's advocate here for a second, because historians often scrutinize POW behavior.
Sure.
Is it possible that the German prisoners, bored and resentful of their captivity, were simply looking for any excuse to antagonize the local farmers? That their actions were less about moral outrage and more about causing friction for their captors?
It's a valid analytical angle, but the specific risks they took suggest a deeper ideological rejection. You have to contextualize this with Walter's upbringing. He watched his father sacrifice his livelihood to reject the Nazi ideology.
So it wasn't just acting out.
No. The POWs weren't engaging in petty vandalism. They were directly, physically intervening in violent assaults, which put them at risk of severe punitive action from the camp commanders.
The first-hand incidents from the sources certainly support that. During one brutally hot shift in the peanut fields, a young black boy and girl brought a bucket of water and 2 mugs out to the laborers.
The German POWs, exhausted and dehydrated, took the mugs and drank.
And the white farmer supervising the field rode over on horseback and began viciously whipping the children simply for allowing the white prisoners to drink from the segregated water supplies.
The German response was immediate and physical. One of the POWs grabbed the farmer, nearly pulling him off his horse. They aggressively confronted him, entirely rejecting the racial segregation of the water and defending the children from the assault.
Another incident happened in transit. The POWs were riding in a transport truck when they passed a field where a young black boy was working a team of mules. The farmer driving the truck decided the boy was working too slowly, stopped the vehicle, and approached the boy with a whip.
Two of the German prisoners vaulted out of the truck, physically disarmed the farmer, confiscated his whip, and threatened to beat him with it if he touched the boy.
Disarming a white farm owner in 1944 Georgia as a foreign prisoner of war is an act of extreme physical courage.
Absolutely. And this moral stance extended beyond the fields. The POWs had negotiated permission to swim in a local lake during their lunch break. A black man living nearby, unaware of the depth of the water and unable to swim, jumped off the diving board and immediately began to drown.
Walter, leveraging his naval training, dove in to extract him. The drowning man panicked and pulled Walter under the surface, but the other POWs rushed in with a long pole, hauling both men to the shore where they managed to resuscitate the man.
And the farm owner observed the entire rescue through binoculars and was enraged.
He explicitly reprimanded the POWs, stating they should have allowed the man to drown to serve as a lethal deterrent to the other black workers about utilizing the lake.
The POWs completely ignored the reprimand. In fact, as an act of sustained defiance, they ensured they swam in that lake every single day they were assigned to that farm thereafter.
The dynamics shifted dramatically, however, when the war in Europe concluded. Following the unconditional surrender of Germany in 1945, the geopolitical status of the prisoners changed. The protections afforded by the Red Cross evaporated.
As the horrific realities of the Holocaust were uncovered by advancing Allied troops, American camp commanders instituted collective punishment protocols against the POWs.
The caloric intake of the prisoners was slashed drastically. They were subjected to starvation rations. For a period of 2 days, the men were fed nothing but grapefruit.
In a deliberate act of psychological punishment, they were ordered to dig trenches and bury fresh, edible meat while suffering from severe malnutrition. Men routinely collapsed in the agricultural fields from exhaustion.
Walter endured this until the repatriation orders finally arrived in 1946. His name was placed on the very first manifest of 200 men scheduled to board a ship back to Germany.
But he observed a 16-year-old prisoner in his barracks who was suffering from profound homesickness. Walter voluntarily surrendered his spot on the manifest to the teenager, assuming he would simply be assigned to the next transport.
That act of empathy resulted in a massive delay. The subsequent transport logistics shifted, and Walter was diverted to the United Kingdom, where he spent an additional year and a half performing hard manual labor, laying subterranean drainage pipes.
He didn't finally set foot in Oldenburg, Germany until the autumn of 1947.
He returned to a nation in absolute ruins. The infrastructure was decimated, food was heavily rationed, and a desperate black market dominated daily life. Yet Walter's reflex to protect the vulnerable remained intact.
While traveling on a train with other repatriated veterans, he witnessed local German police officers aggressively harassing elderly women, searching their belongings to confiscate black market food they had scavenged to survive.
Walter and the combat veterans immediately intervened. They confronted the police officers, leveraging their numbers to force the authorities to back down and eventually forcing them off the train at the next station.
It demonstrated that his intolerance for the abuse of authority applied just as strictly to his own countrymen as it did to foreign captors.
In 1951, sponsored by a Baptist church, emigrates to Canada.
Settles in Vancouver, opens a highly successful service station, marries a woman named Renee, raises 4 daughters in peace.
But the most beautiful moment of resolution happens in 1954. 10 years after floating in the freezing English Channel, making a desperate promise to God.
He finally fulfills it, walks into a pastor's office in Vancouver, tells the story of the grace spot of light, and is baptized.
He writes that in that moment, he finally found complete and utter joy that had eluded him his entire life.
Years later, as an old man, he visits the Moltenort U-boat memorial near Kiel in Germany.
A somber place. Massive curving walls covered in bronze tablets with over 27,000 names of U-boat sailors who died at sea.
Finds the tablet for the U-767, reads the names of Commander Dankleff, his friend Heinz, and the 51 other men.
And he stands there, breathing the ocean air, profoundly grateful that his own name isn't carved into that bronze.
The ultimate image of survival and gratitude.
So as we wrap up this journey, we want to leave you with a lingering, provocative thought to ponder in your own life.
When you find yourself under immense, suffocating pressure.
And you feel like the floor has dropped out, you are trapped in the dark, and the air is running out.
What is the gray spot of light that you keep your eyes fixed on?
And when the pressure finally equalizes, will you have the courage to push open the hatch and swim upward?
Thank you for joining us as we explored this remarkable life.
Until next time, keep diving deep.